My name is Rachel Morgan, and the story I'm about to tell you is one I never imagined would define the rest of my life. It begins on the day that should have been the proudest moment for any young woman, my college graduation. Picture this: hundreds of students in black gowns, families waving from the bleachers, and the air thick with the music of celebration. I had survived 4 grueling years balancing classes, endless late-night shifts, and crushing student debt. That day, I told myself, would finally be proof that I was worth something, that my parents would see me not as a shadow, but as their daughter deserving of pride. But when the ceremony ended, my family stepped forward carrying 2 gift boxes. One was large, wrapped in glossy paper with a brilliant red bow. The other was a thin envelope that felt almost weightless in my hands. My twin sister, let's call her Olivia, was handed the large box first. She tore it open, and the metallic shine of keys spilled into her palm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My parents had bought her a brand new house as her graduation gift. She screamed with delight, clinging to them as cameras flashed and relatives applauded. I stood beside them, my chest trembling with expectation. This was my moment. After all the nights spent scrubbing dishes until my hands cracked, after all the mornings dragging myself from the library with bloodshot eyes, surely I deserved something meaningful. Something that said, "We see you. We're proud of you too. Then my mother turned to me with that thin envelope. I opened it, hands shaking, and inside was nothing but a lottery ticket. She laughed lightly as though it were a harmless joke. "Try your luck, sweetheart. Maybe it will change your life." Olivia chuckled cruelly, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Honestly, Rachel, you're better suited for chance than responsibility. Leave the houses and investments to me. You just stick with lottery tickets." Laughter erupted around her. My father placed a hand on my shoulder, muttering words that felt like stones. "You've always been independent, strong. That ticket fits you." In that moment, it was as if the world froze. I clenched the ticket in my fist, my face burning, my throat too tight to scream. Around me, classmates whispered, relatives shook their heads, cameras captured Olivia's glory, and I was left standing there as the forgotten one. What my family didn't realize was that this very ticket, the one they dismissed with ridicule, would not only change my life but also rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. And as I begin this story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Because no matter where you are, what I learned might just be the reminder you need that even in the deepest shadows of favoritism, a single act of defiance, or in my case, a single forgotten ticket, can set you free. After the ceremony, while Olivia was surrounded by relatives snapping photos of her house keys, I slipped quietly to the edge of the campus lawn. The lottery ticket crinkled inside my pocket like a cruel joke I couldn't escape. But before I go deeper into what happened next, I need to take you back to the house where all of this began. From the outside, our home in suburban Ohio looked like the picture of perfection. A white picket fence, roses climbing up the trellis, family portraits lining every wall inside. To neighbors, we were the Hart family that had everything together. But behind those closed doors, the balance was never equal. From the earliest days of my childhood, favoritism wasn't just a suspicion, it was an open rule. Olivia was the jewel of the family, and I was the background that made her shine brighter. My mother poured herself into polishing Olivia's image. Dance lessons, piano recitals, expensive language tutors. Meanwhile, I set the dinner table, mopped the floors, and tried not to ask for more than hand-me-downs. I remember one Christmas in particular. Olivia tore the wrapping paper off a brand new pink bicycle, the paint still fresh, a white basket with ribbons hanging off the handlebars. Cameras flashed as my parents cheered. When it was my turn, they wheeled out a chipped old bike repainted from a cousin's garage sale find. "It's still good," my father said. "And besides, you're the older sister. You have to give way." That phrase, "you have to give way," became the soundtrack of my life. At birthdays, Olivia had parties with 3-tier cakes and a room full of friends. My name on the cake was usually squished into a corner, half hidden behind candles that spelled out her name. My gifts, a second-hand book, a discounted doll, sometimes nothing at all. And when I asked why, when I dared to voice the injustice, my mother's words cut deeper than any silence. Because Olivia is more special. Imagine being 12 years old, sitting at your desk at school with a worn-out backpack while your twin sister struts in with a designer one stuffed with supplies. Imagine pushing your yellowed notebooks under the table so no one would notice. Imagine hearing classmates whisper, Why does Rachel's stuff always look so old? That humiliation, that shame, it burns into your bones. I carried that shame into every family dinner. Thanksgiving, when my father raised his glass to toast Olivia's music award while I sat quietly serving mashed potatoes. Or the countless nights when I mentioned my essay grades, only to have him wave it off, redirecting the conversation back to Olivia's sports trophies. Even now I can still hear Olivia's mocking voice echoing in my ears. You should be used to it by now. You'll never get more than me. But here's the thing, I wasn't blind. I wasn't numb. I noticed every slight, every secondhand gift, every ignored achievement. And while Olivia thrived on the pedestal my parents built for her, I grew strong in the shadows. My scars became silent vows. Looking back now, I realize those years forged something inside me, an independence my family confused for unworthiness. They thought ignoring me would break me. What they didn't understand is that invisibility can become a weapon. Because when no one expects anything of you, you learn to expect everything from yourself. And that's why the lottery ticket, humiliating as it was, didn't crush me. It reminded me of all those years I'd already survived. The endless reminders that I wasn't the chosen one. The bitter knowledge that even on the day meant to celebrate both Olivia and me equally, my parents couldn't resist tipping the scales. So before I tell you how that ticket came back to change everything, I need you to sit with me in that house of roses and photographs. To see how favoritism can grow quietly like ivy on a wall until one day it strangles everything in its path. Because maybe some of you watching have lived in a house like that too. Maybe you've been told in words or in silence that someone else was more special. If so, I want you to know something. Leave me a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt like the shadow in your own family? Your voice matters here, even if it never mattered to them. And as you type your answer, know this: I was once that shadow. But I was also the girl who swore she'd never let favoritism define her future. I grew up watching two versions of childhood unfold under the same roof. On one side of the hallway was Olivia's room, painted lavender, filled with new toys, ballet shoes lined neatly on the shelf, and trophies glistening under soft light. On the other side was mine, a room with peeling paint, a wobbly desk, and shelves stacked with secondhand books. That divide wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it marked the start of years I'd learned to call the unfair childhood. Every occasion became a reminder that I was destined to give way. Birthdays, for example, were supposed to be days when you felt celebrated. But in my house, Olivia's birthdays looked like grand carnivals. Balloons floated in every corner, 3-layer cakes towered over the dessert table, and the yard filled with squeals of her friends. I was forced to share those parties, but my name was written in tiny frosting letters crammed into the corner of her cake. Sometimes candles covered my name completely. My presents, a discounted doll from the clearance aisle or a dog-eared book someone had passed down. Meanwhile, Olivia opened roller skates wrapped in glittery paper, a princess dress imported from Italy, or the iPod I had once dreamed of owning. I can still remember sitting quietly clapping for her while my heart crumbled. At family dinners, the favoritism turned into a performance. Plates of food steaming on the table, my father raising his glass with pride, and every sentence beginning with Olivia's name. Did you all hear about Olivia's new medal? Or, we're so proud she's taking piano so seriously. And when I tried to speak about my own work, maybe an essay, I scored an A on his response, was a half smile, a nod, and then a swift redirection back to Olivia. One Thanksgiving still burns in my memory. Relatives gathered, laughter rising with the clink of glasses. My father stood beaming, toasting Olivia for winning a music award. I sat quietly, spoon in hand, serving mashed potatoes down the line. Nobody noticed I had also won a statewide essay competition that same week. The silence spoke louder than words. Olivia was worth toasting, and I was worth serving. But what hurt most weren't just the overlooked accomplishments. It was the words that cut straight through my spirit. One night, after Olivia had been showered with praise for bringing home another trophy, I turned to my mother and asked, "Why does she always get more? Why is she always the one you're proud of?" Her reply came without hesitation, like she had rehearsed it 1,000 times. "Because she's more special." More special. Those two words carved a scar I still carry. They made me question whether my very existence was somehow less valuable. Was I truly just a placeholder in this family, the backdrop to Olivia's spotlight? By the time I was 12, That belief had solidified. My classmates showed off their shiny new school supplies, backpacks, smelling of leather notebooks crisp and untouched. Olivia walked proudly with a designer purple bag stuffed with fresh pens and pencils. I, on the other hand, carried the same worn-out backpack with faded straps and yellowed paper notebooks. I shoved it under my desk so no one would notice, but shame still burned through me like wildfire. And Olivia knew. She never missed the chance to mock me, her words slicing deep. "You should be used to it by now. You'll never get more than me." It was supposed to be a joke, but for me it was confirmation. I had been cast in a role I didn't audition for, the shadow twin, the one who endured quietly while the special daughter was pampered. Looking back now, those years could have broken me. But instead, they planted seeds. Every moment of being told I was less taught me resilience. Every party where my name was hidden on the cake made me vow to carve my own name, my own identity one day. I learned silence, not because I was weak, but because I was gathering strength. I learned to swallow bitterness because I knew spitting it out wouldn't change them. And in the quiet of my small, forgotten room, I began whispering promises to myself. One day this will end. One day I'll write my own story. Maybe some of you listening know this feeling. Maybe you've sat at a family table and realized you were invisible. If you've ever been made to feel like a background character in your own life, know this: you are not alone. The world may cast you as the shadow, but shadows only exist where there's light, and sometimes they grow stronger than the light itself. That was the lesson I began to carry, though I didn't yet realize how far it would take me. And as I grew older, the divide between Olivia and me only widened, until high school turned favoritism into something almost unbearable. High school should have been a fresh start, a place where I could finally step outside of Olivia's shadow, but instead it felt like the walls of favoritism followed me through every hallway. On the first day, Olivia walked in wearing brand new clothes, her hair styled perfectly, her backpack shining like it had been pulled from a fashion catalog. I trailed behind with my faded jeans, scuffed sneakers, and the same old backpack I'd been patching for 2 years. Students noticed. They whispered, they compared, and once again I was the twin who looked like she didn't belong. It wasn't just about appearances. Olivia had every extracurricular activity laid out for her: piano lessons, cheerleading tryouts, even debate club, though she had no real interest in public speaking. My parents paid her entry fees, drove her to every practice, and made sure she had the best tutors. When I asked about joining art club, my mother frowned. "That costs money, and you should focus on helping around the house. Olivia needs this more than you." That phrase again: she needs this more than you. I swallowed the rejection, but inside, anger boiled. Art was the one place where I felt free, where my sketches on cheap notebook paper let me express everything I couldn't say out loud. Yet even there, I was told I didn't deserve space. At school events, the imbalance became a spectacle. During a parent-teacher night, one of my teachers told my mother, "Rachel is such a gifted writer. She has real potential." I felt a flicker of hope maybe this time they would see me. But my mother smiled politely and shifted the conversation back to Olivia's grades, which were average at best. "Yes, but Olivia is our shining star," she said with pride. The teacher's smile faltered, and I felt myself shrink once again. It wasn't just my parents, it was Olivia herself. She thrived on their favoritism and wielded it like a weapon. When I tried to stand up for myself, she smirked. "Don't embarrass yourself. You'll never be more than second place in this family." Her words echoed through every corner of my high school years. At prom, she was crowned homecoming queen, while I stood in the back of the gym clapping with everyone else. At sports games, my father cheered for her cheerleading routines, never noticing that I had published short stories in the school magazine. But here's the thing: I wasn't powerless. For every moment I was pushed aside, I found another way to build myself in secret. I worked part-time at the local library, stacking shelves and quietly saving every dollar I could. I read voraciously novels, biographies, essays, teaching myself more than any tutor could. And when teachers encouraged me, I held their words like treasures, reminders that someone somewhere saw me. By senior year, I had built a quiet reputation among peers as the writer. People came to me to edit their essays, to help with speeches, even to write heartfelt letters. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My words became my power, even if my family refused to acknowledge it. And yet the sting never went away. Every holiday was a reminder of my invisibility. On Olivia's 18th birthday, my parents threw her a party so lavish it looked like a wedding reception, lights strung across the backyard, a DJ catering even a rented photo booth. When my birthday rolled around 2 months later, they handed me a small cupcake at the kitchen counter. No candles, no photos, no family gathered around. Just a quiet dismissal, as if I wasn't worth celebrating. That night, sitting alone in my room with the uneaten cupcake, I realized something: I would never win their approval. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, their love had conditions, and I would never meet them. But rather than break me, that realization solidified something deep inside. I didn't need their validation to define me. I could write my own destiny, carve my own path, and one day prove that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless. If you've ever sat in the back of a gym clapping for someone else while your own dreams went unnoticed, you know this feeling. And I want you to pause for a second and reflect. Was there ever a time you realized your family, or the people you trusted most, would never see you for who you really are? Because here's the truth: the moment you stop begging for their recognition is the moment you begin building your own. And though high school left me with scars, it also left me with a fire burning too fiercely to be extinguished. Little did I know that fire would lead me straight into a future none of them could have predicted. College was supposed to be the place where I could finally breathe. For the first time, I was miles away from the suffocating walls of favoritism, and for a brief moment, it felt like I could start over. No one knew me as Olivia's twin. No one compared my secondhand clothes to her designer outfits. For the first time, I was just Rachel. But freedom came with a price. My parents had poured thousands into Olivia's tuition at a prestigious private university. When it came to me, their words were blunt: "You'll need to figure it out on your own." I didn't argue. I had expected it. I applied for scholarships, worked 2 part-time jobs, and carried a workload that would have crushed most. My days blurred into a cycle of early mornings in the campus library, afternoons tutoring high school students for extra cash, and late nights waitressing at a diner where the smell of fried food clung to my hair. Meanwhile, Olivia's social media was flooded with photos of college parties, shopping trips, and European vacations sponsored by our parents. Every picture was a reminder of the life I was denied. Yet instead of envy, I began to feel something different: determination. Each dollar I earned, each paper I submitted, each sleepless night was proof that I was surviving without them. Still, it wasn't easy. I remember one night in particular. I was walking back to my dorm at 2 a.m. after a long shift at the diner. My shoes were soaked from the rain, and my hands were cracked from washing dishes. I passed by a group of students laughing outside a cafe, carefree and warm. For a second, I felt the weight of loneliness so heavy it almost crushed me. Why do I always have to fight twice as hard for half as much? The answer came slowly over the months, because fighting was shaping me. While Olivia floated through life cushioned by privilege, I was learning grit, resilience, and the value of every single victory. Professors noticed. One of them, Dr. Hayes, pulled me aside after class one day. "Rachel," he said, "I've read thousands of essays in my career. Yours cut through. You have something rare. Don't waste it." His words lit something inside me. For the first time, I felt like my talent wasn't just a consolation prize, it was a weapon. But even as I started to shine academically, my family's disregard followed me. During winter break, my sophomore year, I went home and shared proudly that I had been published in a respected journal. My father nodded absent-mindedly, then turned to Olivia and asked about her weekend plans. She bragged about a sorority party, and everyone lit up with excitement. My achievement was dismissed once again in favor of Olivia's social life. That night, lying awake in my childhood bed, I realized something crucial. No matter how high I climbed, my family would never cheer for me. Their silence was not a reflection of my worth, it was a reflection of their blindness. From then on, I stopped seeking their approval. I funneled all my energy into my own path. By junior year, I had landed a coveted internship at a publishing house, working alongside editors who treated me with respect. For once, I wasn't the other twin. I was Rachel, the writer, with potential. And it was in that environment, surrounded by people who valued me, that I began to taste freedom, not the fragile kind you borrow, but the kind you build brick by brick. So let me pause here and whisper something to you. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever had to claw your way toward recognition, while others were handed it freely, you know the kind of fire I'm talking about. And if you're listening now, share your story in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to fight alone. Don't just listen, join in. Because college wasn't just about books or jobs for me. It was about unlearning the lie that I was less. It was about proving that being overlooked was not a curse, it was the foundation of my strength. And little did I know this strength was about to be tested in ways that would shake everything I thought I knew about family and loyalty. By the time senior year rolled around, I had built a fragile rhythm classes work writing repeat. My exhaustion became routine like breathing, but then came the phone call that shattered it all. It was a Saturday morning. I was hunched over my laptop editing a paper when my mom's voice crackled through the line. "Rachel, I need you to send money. Your sister's car broke down and she needs to get to her internship in the city." I froze. Her car. The one Dad bought her last summer. Meanwhile, I was biking to my internship rain or shine because I couldn't afford a car. "Mom," I said slowly, "I barely have enough to cover rent and books this month." Her sigh cut like a blade. "Rachel, you've always been the responsible one. Olivia can't manage these things. She needs your help." There it was again, that same poisonous refrain. "She needs this more than you." I wanted to scream. To ask why Olivia's every inconvenience was treated like an emergency while my constant struggle was invisible. But instead my voice cracked, "I can't. I won't." Her silence on the other end was colder than winter. "You've changed, Rachel. Family helps family. Don't be selfish." Then she hung up. For days, guilt gnawed at me. Years of conditioning had wired me to believe that saying no made me ungrateful, unloving. But beneath the guilt was something else, defiance. For the first time, I hadn't bent. I hadn't sacrificed myself for Olivia. And though my mother's disappointment weighed heavily, there was also a spark of relief, like I had drawn my first boundary and survived. But my family didn't let it go. Over Thanksgiving break, I walked into the living room to find Olivia perched on the couch, telling the story to a room full of relatives. "Rachel wouldn't even help me when my car broke down," she said, her voice dripping with betrayal. "She acts like she's better than us now." Gasps and disapproving looks swirled around me. I wanted to shout the truth that I'd been carrying my own weight while they coddled her, but the words caught in my throat. That night I cried in silence. Not because I regretted my choice, but because I realized something brutal: my family had chosen Olivia's comfort over my dignity, and they always would. Yet in that heartbreak, another realization bloomed. I didn't have to keep proving myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I could choose myself, even if it meant standing alone. Back at school, I poured everything into my writing. My short stories grew sharper, angrier, alive with themes of betrayal, invisibility, and defiance. One piece about a girl whose shadow consumed her caught the attention of a national literary contest. Against all odds, I won. When I stood on that stage holding the award, I thought of my mother's words. "You've changed, Rachel." Yes, I had, and I wasn't sorry. But family wounds have a way of reopening. A month later, Olivia called me directly. "I can't believe you'd embarrass me like that," she hissed. "Do you know how it feels to have a sister who refuses to back you up?" I almost laughed. "Do you know how it feels," I wanted to say, "to be invisible your entire life, to have your birthdays forgotten, your victories ignored, your sacrifices dismissed?" But instead, I said quietly, "Olivia, I'm done being your safety net." And I hung up. It felt like ripping a bandage off an old wound, painful but freeing. If you're listening right now, maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had to say no for the first time and felt the world turn against you. Let me tell you this: you are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not ungrateful for refusing to bleed so others can thrive. Share your story below, because someone else needs to hear they're not alone. That moment marked a turning point. No more being the forgotten twin, no more second place. I was carving a life where my voice finally mattered. And yet I had no idea that my refusal to play their game would soon ignite a storm that would test everything I thought I'd built. Graduation day should have been the crowning moment of my struggle, the proof that every late-night shift, every skipped meal, every sacrifice had been worth it. My friends were buzzing with excitement, snapping photos in their caps and gowns. But for me, the day carried a knot of dread. I kept scanning the crowd, knowing my parents would show up only for one reason: Olivia. And I was right. When the ceremony began, I walked across the stage to accept my diploma. My heart pounded as I looked out at the audience, searching for familiar faces. I spotted them in the front row, Mom, Dad, a cluster of aunts and uncles. They were clapping politely, their expressions neutral, almost distracted. It wasn't until Olivia's name was called when she strutted across the stage in her honor cords that they erupted with cheers, whistles, and standing ovations. Cameras flashed like fireworks. I felt my chest tighten. After everything, after clawing my way here alone, they still can't see me. Later, as families gathered for photos, I lingered near the edge of the lawn with my friends. My parents eventually approached, arms full of flowers for Olivia. They handed her bouquet after bouquet, showering her with congratulations. For me, there was only a quick hug from my mother, as if I were a distant cousin, not her daughter. I told myself it didn't matter, that my degree was mine, regardless of their recognition. But deep down, the sting was sharp. I slipped away early, retreating to my tiny apartment where my cap and gown hung like hollow symbols on the chair. Alone in the quiet, I realized the truth: my family would never give me the applause I deserved. And maybe I didn't need it anymore. A week later, reality struck harder. While Olivia secured a glamorous marketing job through Dad's connections, I was left hustling in the publishing industry, starting at the very bottom. I took an assistant position at a small firm, answering phones, running errands, doing whatever grunt work needed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. One night, overwhelmed by exhaustion, I scrolled through social media and saw Olivia's post, her sleek new office, captioned, "So proud of myself for working hard and earning this." The irony nearly made me laugh. I shut my phone off and stared at the ceiling, whispering to myself, "Your story will be different. You'll build something real." That mantra carried me through those early months. I stayed late, volunteered for projects others avoided, and quietly built a reputation as someone dependable. My bosses began to notice, tossing me editing work, then small writing assignments. Every tiny win felt like fuel. But even as I carved my path, my family's shadow loomed. At a holiday dinner, I shared that one of my articles had been published in a respected magazine. My father looked up, briefly nodded, then asked Olivia how her new car was running. The conversation shifted instantly, leaving my accomplishment to evaporate in the air. That was the moment it crystallized. No matter what I achieved, their validation would always belong to Olivia. And so I made a decision that changed everything. I would stop fighting for their approval entirely. I would live as though it didn't exist. But here's the thing: releasing their recognition didn't mean the wounds vanished. It meant I had to rebuild my sense of worth from scratch. And that rebuilding was messy, raw, and filled with nights where I questioned whether I was strong enough to keep going. Still, through the cracks of my pain, something new was sprouting: independence. And independence has a way of making you unrecognizable, not just to others, but to yourself. If you're hearing this, and you've ever stood in the shadow of someone else's spotlight, let me whisper to you, you don't need their clapping hands to validate your steps. Your quiet persistence is its own ovation. What I didn't know then was that this choice to release their grip on my worth would set me on a collision course with the truth about family loyalty and the unexpected places where love really lives. The months after graduation were a blur of fluorescent office lights, ramen dinners, and the steady hum of exhaustion. My assistant job didn't pay much, but it gave me something more valuable than money: a foothold. Slowly, editors began trusting me with drafts, then rewrites, and finally original assignments. I clung to each opportunity like a rope leading out of a pit. One night after a 12-hour day, I found myself on a nearly empty subway car, staring at my reflection in the window. My eyes were sunken, my hair unkempt, but there was fire there too. For the first time, I thought, this is mine. No one handed me this. I am building it brick by brick. Still, family had a way of pulling me back into the storm. It was Olivia again. She called late one evening, her voice dripping with casual entitlement. "Rachel, Dad and I are planning a trip to Cabo. I thought you could watch my apartment while I'm gone. Feed my cat, water my plants. You don't mind, right?" I bit down hard on my lip. Don't mind, I hadn't been on a vacation in years. I was working 2 jobs just to keep my rent paid. And yet, her request wasn't framed as a question, it was an expectation. I said no. My voice trembled, but it was firm. "Olivia, I can't. My schedule is packed, and I won't rearrange my life around yours." The silence stretched long enough for me to picture her face twisting in disbelief. Then came the hiss, "You're so bitter. No wonder no one wants to be around you." She hung up before I could reply. Her words lingered like smoke. Bitter. Unwanted. The ghosts of childhood labels resurfaced, threatening to drown me. But as I sat alone in my tiny apartment, I realized something important. She had no power except the power I gave her. And I was done giving. The next morning, I funneled that energy into my work. I pitched a deeply personal essay about invisibility, favoritism, and the cost of being the responsible one. I half expected my editor to dismiss it as too raw, too niche. Instead, she leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Rachel, this is powerful. Let's run it." When the piece was published, something shifted. Emails trickled in from strangers. I thought I was the only one who felt this way. "Thank you for putting my life into words." I cried reading this. For the first time, I wasn't screaming into a void. People heard me, people saw me. But with recognition came backlash. Olivia stumbled across the essay, and within hours my phone was buzzing with furious texts. "How dare you air our family business? You're pathetic. Do you know how humiliating this is for Mom and Dad?" I almost deleted the essay, fear gnawing at my chest. But then I reread one of the emails from a reader. "Your story gave me courage to finally stand up for myself." That was my answer. I left the essay up. The fallout was brutal. My parents called me selfish, dramatic, attention-seeking. "You've embarrassed us," Dad snapped. "You've always exaggerated things." But something in me had hardened. Maybe I said quietly, or maybe you just never wanted to hear the truth. It was the first time I had spoken back without flinching. And in that silence, I realized my voice was no longer just mine. It belonged to every person who had been ignored, dismissed, or overshadowed. If you've ever had your truth dismissed as exaggeration, know this: your story matters even if the people closest to you refuse to listen. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak it out loud anyway. That essay became the first domino. More publications followed. My byline began appearing in places I once only dreamed of. My family's disapproval still stung, but their voices grew smaller compared to the chorus of strangers telling me my words had weight. I didn't know it then, but I was standing at the edge of a cliff. One more push, and everything I thought I knew about loyalty, identity, and family would come crashing down. When my essay went viral, I thought the storm would pass quickly, that the anger from my family would fade, swallowed by their usual cycle of denial and distraction. I was wrong. What began as snide comments and cold shoulders soon escalated into something far uglier. At Thanksgiving, I walked into my parents' house and felt the atmosphere tighten like a noose. Plates clattered, forks scraped, but no one met my eyes. Olivia, radiant as always in her designer dress, finally broke the silence. "So, Rachel, enjoyed your 15 minutes of fame trashing your family." The table chuckled nervously. My father leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "You've always had a flair for dramatics, but dragging us into public humiliation, that's unforgivable." I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to backpedal, to apologize, to beg for their acceptance like I used to. But another part, the part that had fought to be heard, refused. "I didn't trash anyone," I said evenly. "I told my story. If the truth feels like humiliation, maybe you should ask why." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face hardened, her eyes glossy with anger. I knew in that moment whatever fragile bond remained between us had just snapped. And yet, walking out of that housecoat clutched tight against the November wind, I felt strangely lighter. Lonely, yes, but free. The months that followed were a crucible. I poured myself into work, writing late into the night, fueled by both defiance and determination. Opportunities began to multiply: guest columns, panel invitations, even the chance to speak at a small conference about resilience and identity. But with every new door opening, the whispers grew louder. Olivia began a campaign behind the scenes, telling relatives and family friends that I was unstable, desperate for attention, even dangerous. I learned that some cousins had been told to keep their distance. It stung, but I had learned something vital: other people's narratives didn't have to define me. Still, the question haunted me in quiet hours. If family can so easily disown you, what does that word even mean? One night I shared that thought aloud during a podcast interview. The host leaned forward and said something that lodged in my chest. "Maybe family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shows up for you when no one else does." I carried that line like a torch into the dark. And here's where I'll pause, because what came next, it shifted everything. My definition of loyalty, belonging, and even love itself was about to be rewritten in a way I never expected. But before I take you into that moment, let me ask you something directly, because your voice matters in this story too. Have you ever had to choose between speaking your truth and keeping the peace with people who should have loved you unconditionally? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read everyone, and your stories fuel this journey more than you know. And if you've been walking this tightrope in silence, hit that subscribe button and join this community. You're not alone here. We hold each other up when the world tries to tear us down. Because what happened next in my life? Well, it proved that sometimes losing the family you were born into is only the beginning of finding the one you were meant for. I didn't expect it to happen on an ordinary Tuesday. I had just finished another late shift, the kind where your fingers ache from typing and your eyes blur from too many glowing screens. The air outside was sharp, the kind of New York winter wind that bites through even the thickest coat. I pulled my scarf tighter, clutching the folder of notes for my next article when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. For a second, I almost let it go to voicemail. Something told me to pick up. Rachel, this is Claire Donovan. I read your essay. I froze. Claire Donovan, the editor-in-chief of one of the largest publications in the country. A woman I had admired from afar for years, someone whose words had shaped my own sense of voice. I'd like to meet, she continued. We're putting together a feature on resilience. I think your story belongs there. My knees nearly gave out right there on the sidewalk. The meeting happened the next week in a glass-walled office high above Manhattan. Claire listened as I recounted not just my essay, but the years behind it, the favoritism, the quiet erasure, the nights I'd sat awake wondering if maybe my family was right about me. She didn't interrupt, didn't glance at her phone once. When I finished, she leaned in and said, "You know, Rachel, what you've survived isn't just personal, it's universal. And that's why your voice matters." Her words were a balm, but also a challenge. Could I shoulder that responsibility to speak for not just myself, but for countless others carrying invisible wounds? The feature ran the following month. My photo was on the cover. The article went further than I'd ever dared, exploring the deep scars of family betrayal, but also the strength that can emerge from choosing truth over silence. It was raw, it was risky, and it was everywhere. Emails turned into phone calls into offers. I was invited to panels, asked to write books, even approached by producers about a documentary. For the first time, the world wasn't just listening, it was amplifying my voice. But with the spotlight came shadows. Olivia exploded when she saw the magazine. She left a voicemail dripping with venom. "You think you're some kind of hero. You're nothing but a fraud, Rachel. You've destroyed this family and you'll regret it." Her rage didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was my reaction. I didn't cry, I didn't shrink, I simply deleted the message. Because here's the truth, her voice no longer defined me. Instead, I thought about the girl in Kansas who emailed me saying she finally stood up to her father. The single mother in Chicago who told me my words gave her courage to leave an abusive marriage. The college student in Seattle who wrote, "You gave me permission to believe I wasn't crazy." That was my family now, not by blood, but by bond. People I'd never met yet who carried my words in their hearts the way I carried theirs. Of course, part of me still longed for reconciliation, for some sign that my parents, my sister, could one day see me not as a traitor, but as a daughter, a sister worthy of love. But each time I reached for that hope, I remembered the weight of their silence, their disdain, and I let it go. 'Cause here's the paradox, losing them had given me myself. Standing backstage before one of my first public talks, I whispered to my reflection, "You belong here." Not because they cast you out, but because you chose to stand. And as the lights came up and the audience hushed, I stepped into the brightness, ready to tell the truth one more time. The world was listening, but I had no idea just how much further this story would go, or how one twist of fate would pull my family back into my orbit in ways I never could have imagined. It started with a letter, not an email, not a text, but an actual letter slipped through my mail slot, folded into an envelope with no return address. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper and saw the handwriting my mother's. "Rachel," it read, "we saw your article. I don't agree with the way you painted this family, but maybe there are things we should have handled differently. Maybe we should talk." For days I carried that letter in my bag like a hot coal. Every time I touched it, I felt both burned and tempted. Was this the crack in the wall I had been waiting for? A chance at reconciliation, however fragile? But then the other voice in my head spoke up. "Haven't you been here before?" Haven't you reached for their love only to be cut down again? The tug of war consumed me. I barely slept. Finally, I decided to test the waters. I called my parents' house. Olivia answered. Her tone was ice. So the prodigal daughter returns. What do you want, Rachel? Another round of pity. Another stage to play victim. I almost hung up right there. But before I could, my father's voice came on the line. Enough, Olivia, Rachel. Maybe we should sit down, just us. No cameras, no drama. So I agreed. Against every warning bell in my chest, I agreed. We met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind with chipped mugs and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I arrived early, palms sweating against the Formica table. When they walked in, I felt 12 years old again, desperate for approval, terrified of rejection. The first few minutes were small talk, coffee orders, weather. Then my mother leaned in. Rachel, do you ever think about how your words affect others? Your sister can't even go to the grocery store without whispers. Do you know what that feels like? The old guilt surged up familiar as oxygen. But I steadied myself. Do you know what it feels like, I asked softly, to be erased by your own family? To be told over and over that you're less? For a moment, silence. My father's eyes flickered something between shame and denial. My mother's jaw tightened. Then she said, we didn't erase you. We just celebrated the child who deserved it more. The words hit like a slap. That was the truth. Laid bare. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen not to see me. And in that instant, clarity washed over me. I had come to this meeting hoping for a crack in the wall, a sliver of love. Instead, I found a locked door with no key. I stood, dropped a few bills on the table, and said I won't spend the rest of my life begging for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. Walking out into the cold night, my breath fogging in the air, I felt grief deep and raw. But I also felt something else release. Because here's the thing about truth, once you've spoken it, it can't be unsaid. And once you've seen the bars of your cage, you can't unsee them. That night, I made a vow. I would stop chasing ghosts. I would stop trying to turn locked doors into open ones. Instead, I would build a new table, one where no one had to beg for a chair. And what I didn't know then was that people, strangers, really were already gathering at that table waiting for me to take my place. I didn't expect the crowd. It was a community hall in Brooklyn, nothing fancy, just folding chairs, fluorescent lights, and a podium borrowed from the library. I had agreed to speak after a local nonprofit reached out saying survivors of family estrangement wanted to hear my story. Honestly, I thought maybe a dozen people would show. Instead, the room was packed. Every seat filled, people lining the walls, notebooks, open eyes fixed on me. As I stepped up to the microphone, the air felt electric. I looked out and saw faces of all ages, young women clutching each other's hands, middle-aged men staring at the floor, even a grandmother wiping away tears before I had said a word. For the first time, I understood this wasn't just my story anymore. I began with the diner, the chipped mugs, the words my mother had spoken. We just celebrated the child who deserved it more. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath. Then I told them what came next, how I left that night, not with reconciliation, but with freedom. I realized I said that waiting for their love was like waiting for a train that was never coming. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting. Heads nodded. People leaned forward. A man in the second row whispered, yes. The words poured out of me, not polished like a magazine essay, but raw, jagged, alive. I spoke about scars that never quite fade, about the nights I questioned my worth, about the moment I finally chose to stop begging and start building. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, but thunder, the kind that shakes the floor. And then something unexpected happened. One by one, people stood up. They didn't just clap, they spoke. A young woman near the back raised her hand and said, my father told me I was the family's shame. For years I believed him. But tonight, hearing you, I feel like I can breathe again. A man with gray hair stood and added, my brother cut me off after I refused to cover his debts. I thought I was alone, but maybe I'm not. It became a wave, testimony after testimony, voices rising, weaving together into something bigger than any one of us. That night I realized this was no longer about speaking, it was about gathering. About creating spaces where the invisible could be seen, where the unheard could speak. And as I hugged strangers who no longer felt like strangers, a thought whispered in the back of my mind. Maybe this is the family I was always meant to find. But here's the thing about moments of light, they often cast the darkest shadows. Because while that room felt like sanctuary outside, forces were stirring. Olivia had seen photos from the event posted online. The backlash was brewing again, this time louder, nastier, more public. And soon it would collide with my new community in ways none of us expected. But before I tell you about that night when my old family tried to crash into the new one, I want to ask you something. If you've ever felt silenced, erased, or left out of your own family's story, what would you say if given the microphone for just 1 minute? Leave it in the comments, I promise I'll read them. The photos spread faster than I ever imagined. Someone at the Brooklyn gathering had taken a picture me, on stage, microphone, in hand, a crowd of tearful faces behind me. They posted it with the caption, "Rachel Carter is building a new kind of family." By morning, the image had gone viral. Thousands of shares, comments pouring in. Most were supportive. This is the strength we need. Finally, someone saying what we all feel, but not all. My sister Olivia's voice broke through the noise. She posted on Facebook tagging me directly, "Don't be fooled." Rachel's not a hero. She's a bitter woman who rewrites history to make herself look good. Ask anyone who really knows her. The comments beneath her post multiplied a cascade of sneers and doubts. Some even came from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Words like liar, attention seeker, betrayer. For a few hours I froze. It felt like the old nightmare replaying itself, my family closing ranks, pointing at me, deciding I was the villain. But then something happened I didn't expect. Supporters fought back. People I'd never met filled the comment threads with their own stories. My family said the same thing about me, Rachel. "You're not alone. Families lie to protect their golden child. Thank you for telling the truth." The tide was shifting. This wasn't just about my story anymore, it was about a movement. Still, Olivia wasn't done. She emailed me directly, her words dripping with rage. "Stop embarrassing this family, or I'll show everyone what you're hiding." What I was hiding? The threat gnawed at me. Was it just empty spite, or did she have something real? That night I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, rereading her words. My heart pounded. My fingers trembled above the keyboard. And then I did something I had never dared before. I drafted a public letter. Not to Olivia, not even to my parents, but to anyone who had ever been silenced. In it I wrote, "They say I'm bitter. They say I'm lying. But the truth is simpler. I was erased and I refused to disappear. If that makes me a villain in their story, so be it. I would rather be their villain than my own ghost." I ended with a challenge to anyone watching. Ask yourself whose version of you is true, the one they tell or the one you know in your bones. I hit publish before I could second guess. The response was seismic. Overnight messages flooded in. Survivors, allies, even journalists. An editor from a national magazine reached out asking if I would expand my story into an essay. But not all the attention was welcome, because Olivia's warning hadn't been a bluff. The next morning, I woke to a new headline splashed across a gossip site, "Rachel Carter's secret, past what she doesn't want you to know." They claimed to have evidence of a betrayal from years ago, something twisted, half-true, designed to smear me. And my family. They fanned the flames, nodding along in interviews. It was their counterattack. And here's the thing, I knew this moment would come. But I wasn't prepared for just how brutal it would be. And maybe that's why what I did next surprised even me. Because instead of retreating, I walked straight into the fire. But before I tell you how I faced that storm head-on, let me ask you this: if the people closest to you suddenly exposed your darkest mistake, would you run from it or own it? The headline was everywhere. "Rachel Carter's secret past, what she doesn't want you to know." I remember the moment I first saw it. I was in a coffee shop, the kind where the baristas call your name with too much cheer. My phone buzzed, and there it was, my face plastered beside a half-truth twisted into scandal. My chest tightened, and for a second the room spun. The secret they exposed wasn't what they claimed. Years ago, during one of my lowest points, I had borrowed money from my parents without asking technically. Yes, it was from a joint family account. At the time, I was drowning, desperate, trying to pay rent after losing my job. I had repaid it quietly months later. No harm done. But now Olivia and my parents painted it as theft, betrayal, proof of my so-called bitterness. I could almost hear their voices in the article. "See, she's always been selfish. This is who she really is." The comments were vicious. Strangers called me a fraud. Others suggested I was building my movement on lies. For a moment, I thought about disappearing again, shutting down my accounts, walking away from the stage, retreating into the silence where no one could touch me. That would have been easy, familiar. But then I remembered that night in Brooklyn, the faces in the crowd, the tears, the voices saying "me too." They weren't cheering for perfection. They weren't following me because I was flawless. They needed me because I was human. And so I made a choice. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and wrote a new post. The cursor blinked like a dare. I began with the truth. Yes, years ago, I took money from my family's account without permission. I was desperate. I repaid it. But they don't tell you that part, do they? Because the truth isn't what they want. What they want is silence. And I refused to give it to them. I didn't stop there. I went deeper, telling the story of the loneliness that had driven me the nights when hunger and shame pressed down on me like a weight. I wrote not to defend myself, but to reclaim the narrative. If you're reading this and you've made mistakes, know this. You are not your worst moment. You are the courage it takes to keep going anyway. The post went live at midnight. By morning, it had been shared over 100,000 times. Comments poured in. Finally, someone admits they're not perfect. This is what real strength looks like. Rachel, thank you for saying what so many of us feel. For the first time, my family's smear campaign backfired. Their attempt to shame me only amplified my voice. People weren't repelled by my imperfection, they were drawn to it. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the cracks inside me. Because while the public was on my side, the private pain was still raw. The idea that my parents and sister had gone to such lengths to destroy me, it was a wound that no viral post could heal. One night after another barrage of hateful messages, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, whispering, "What if they're right? What if I am everything they say?" And yet, in the same breath, another voice answered, "Or maybe you're proof that survival is louder than shame." That's when I realized this battle wasn't just against them, it was against the part of me that still craved their approval. And until I broke free from that, I would never truly be free. So I started planning something bold, something public, something that would force me to step fully into the life I was building and leave no room for retreat. Because the final confrontation wasn't going to happen online. It was going to happen face to face. The day finally came. I knew it wouldn't be online. I knew it wouldn't be through emails or comments. I had arranged to meet my family in person, a neutral location, a quiet restaurant on the edge of town. I arrived early, heels clicking against the polished floor, and took a deep breath. This wasn't about reconciliation anymore. This was about closure. They walked in minutes later, my mother with her practiced smile, my father stiff and rigid, Olivia radiant but tense. The familiar weight of my childhood pressed down on me, but I had grown into it differently now. I wasn't that frightened girl anymore. The meal started awkwardly. Small talk. Weather. Olivia's new job. Mom mentioned a charity she was involved in. Father talked about a new car. Everything rehearsed. Everything staged. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. They asked me to help. Olivia leaned forward, voice smooth. "Rachel, we know you're doing well now. We're planning to expand the house, cover some wedding costs, and handle some debts. You can help, right?" I stared at them. My mind flashed back to every meal where my accomplishments were ignored, every birthday where I received hand-me-downs while Olivia got designer dresses, every college shift where I struggled alone while she partied. A strange calm settled over me. I placed my hand on the table and spoke steady and unwavering. "Do you know why I'm here today? Not to help you. Not to apologize for surviving. I'm here to tell you no one has the right to use me as a resource they never valued. I am not your wallet. I am not your convenience. I am my own person." Olivia's eyes widened. You're being selfish," she spat. I smiled faintly. "No, I'm being free." And then I did something that made the room go silent. I reached into my bag, pulled out a blank check, the sum from my lottery winnings, and held it before them. The gleaming paper caught the light. Their mouths opened, expecting me to sign. Instead, I tore it into pieces. Each shred fluttered onto the table, the sound like a declaration. "This is mine, and you will never touch it." For a moment, none of them moved. My mother's lips trembled. My father's hand clenched the silverware so tightly his knuckles whitened. Olivia stared at me, a mixture of shock, rage, and disbelief etched across her face. You see, I continued calm for 23 years. I fought for scraps of recognition. I waited for your approval, and I learned something essential. I don't need it. I have my life. I have my freedom. And now you get nothing. The tension was suffocating. My parents tried to speak. Olivia shouted, but I had no intention of responding. My boundary had been drawn. I had claimed my life in the only way that mattered by refusing to hand it over to people who never truly valued me. I rose my chair, scraping against the floor, and walked toward the door. Each step echoed in the room like a drumbeat of liberation. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around me. I inhaled deeply, tasting the sweetness of independence for the first time in my life. As I stepped into the night, I realized something profound: the lottery ticket, the late-night shifts, the essays, the viral story, they all led to this moment. Not the money itself, but the strength it represented. My life would no longer be dictated by fear, favoritism, or the expectations of others. And now I could truly begin living, not for them, not for Olivia, but for myself. If you've been holding back waiting for someone else to validate your worth, let this be your call to action. Take your freedom. Step forward. Stand for yourself. And if you need inspiration, check out my next story, where I turn my winnings into a project that changes lives, not just mine, but the lives of countless others who have felt invisible. The streets of New York were quiet that night, the city's hum softened by the late hour. I walked slowly, my heels clicking against the pavement, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't defined by their favoritism, their mockery, or their neglect. I was defined by my choices, my courage, and the life I had carved out with my own hands. Sitting in my small apartment later, I looked out the window at the skyline, the lights flickering like distant stars. My thoughts drifted back to the girl who had stayed up until 3 a.m., typing essays under the dim light of a library desk the nights I ate instant noodles while everyone else celebrated, and the graduation day when a lottery ticket seemed like the cruelest joke. And yet that ticket had been the beginning, not because of the money itself, but because it became a symbol of possibility, resilience, and the life I could build on my own terms. I had learned that family doesn't always mean love, and that blood alone cannot define loyalty. Love, respect, and recognition must be earned and freely given. And sometimes cutting ties with those who harm you isn't selfish, it's the only way to survive and to truly thrive. I realized that freedom isn't just the absence of control from others, it's the presence of choice, the ability to stand on your own, and the courage to step into the life you deserve without apology. In the following months, I expanded my work using my resources to create opportunities for others who had been overlooked, marginalized, or silenced. I started a scholarship fund for students who worked multiple jobs just to pursue their education. I mentored young writers sharing not just skills, but lessons in resilience, independence, and self-worth. Every time I saw someone rise, grow, or reclaim their voice, I felt a quiet satisfaction, proof that my journey, though painful, had purpose. And though I occasionally saw headlines of my family or heard rumors of their attempts to reach out, I remained untouched. I had learned the most important lesson: no one has the right to diminish your light. You are the architect of your life, and the only approval you truly need is your own. As the sun rose over the city, I sipped my coffee on the balcony of my new lake house, watching the water ripple and the trees sway gently in the morning breeze. For the first time in my life, I felt whole, unburdened, and truly free. The past had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. And in that freedom, I discovered a truth more powerful than money, recognition, or even family: the life you choose for yourself can be far richer, far fuller, and far more beautiful than the one anyone else tries to impose on you.